You've noticed it happening in real time. A name shows up on your screen, and for the first time in months, your stomach doesn't drop. For a long stretch, that single notification used to run your whole afternoon. A glance, a message, a single word from them had the power to knock you off center, as if your stability depended on something outside yourself. You weren't weak. You had just handed over the controls without noticing. Then one day, they left. At first there was noise, unanswered questions, emotions spilling everywhere, long nights where your mind replayed the same conversations, hunting for signs in what was just empty space. But slowly, that noise turned into something else, an uncomfortable quiet. And instead of eating you alive, that quiet started shaping you. Something shifted in that space. With no contact, you stopped being the person who flinched at their every move. You started moving slower, calmer, rebuilding your own center instead of watching theirs. Without meaning to, the silence became a strategy. What used to look like vulnerability was now steady presence. What used to look like waiting was now clarity. And like it always goes, when the energy shifts, they came back. Sometimes directly, sometimes with something smaller, a late-night text, a line dripping with nostalgia. I've been thinking about you. I don't know why we drifted apart. I miss you. Words that once would have set off a storm now trigger something else entirely, clear-headedness. Because you understand now that not every return means growth. Sometimes it means emptiness. Sometimes it means ego. Sometimes it just means fear. This is where most people fall back in. They mistake intensity for depth, urgency for love, words for proof. They drop their guard the second they hear what they wanted to hear, and step right back into a cycle they already know too well. But you're not here to repeat the same story. You're here to look at it with new eyes. Nobody hands you a manual for this. You just need clarity, patience, and enough internal structure that the first sign of pressure doesn't send you looking for your phone. And for that, the questions themselves matter more than any silence you hold. Not to manipulate, to reveal, not to punish, to see the truth without the decoration. This isn't about revenge or emotional games. It's about taking back the internal control you once gave away without realizing it. It's about letting their words and actions unfold in a space where you can't be swept up by impulse. Because once you're the one asking the questions instead of accepting whatever answer shows up, the whole conversation tilts in a different direction. Every relationship has a quiet turning point, the moment you stop asking whether they'll come back and start asking whether they deserve to. That's where these 7 questions come in. They're not tests designed to torment anyone. They're filters built to see clearly. Each one shines a light on something different: intention, accountability, real change, boundaries, direction, worthiness. Not to judge harshly, but to separate what's real from what's just emotionally convenient. If you're here, it's because you don't want to repeat old patterns. You want to understand. You want to act from strength, not impulse. And that alone already puts you somewhere different. This path isn't easy, but it holds. It takes emotional discipline, mental clarity, and the nerve to stay quiet while the masks fall on their own. Before we get into these 7 questions, I want to be upfront about something. Making this kind of content deep, independent, and free of emotional shortcuts takes real time and daily work. If this space means something to you and you want to help it keep growing with the same honesty, you can do that easily by tapping the thanks button below. It's a small gesture, but it makes a real difference. Now take a breath. What's coming next isn't an emotional game. It's a process of revealing what's actually there. Question 1. What are you really looking for from me? Love, or somewhere to hide from being alone? When someone comes back, this is the question that cuts through the fog and shows what most people would rather keep hidden. It's not just a reunion, it's a mirror. Are they back because they value you, or because they miss the comfort you used to represent? It almost always starts small, almost innocent. A comment on something you posted weeks ago, a mutual friend mentioning your name to them in passing, or that line loaded with nostalgia. I miss you. The person who walked away shows back up like nothing happened, like time never had consequences. And before your reason catches up, your emotions are already running the show. That's when clarity slips. Memories that had been sitting quietly behind a closed door suddenly come rushing forward, like they'd been waiting for exactly this signal. Your heart remembers the warmth, not the wounds. And if you're not grounded in yourself, that wave of feeling can drag you right back to the places you fought hard to leave. This is where strategic silence gets tested. Nostalgia has a convincing voice. It whispers that maybe this is the second chance they deserve. It gets you confusing familiar with true. But there's a mistake hiding underneath. Your mind reads absence as transformation, when in reality most people don't come back because they grew. They come back because the silence finally became unbearable. Ask yourself plainly, does their return come from love or from emptiness? Someone acting from love shows depth, accountability, and changes you can actually see. Someone acting from emptiness just wants quick relief. That difference decides everything, whether the story gets rebuilt or the same cycle of regret just starts over. Loneliness knows how to dress itself up well. It hides in how fast they're talking, in the rush to reclaim a space that isn't theirs anymore, in trying to pick things up without having rebuilt anything first. This isn't about you. It's about their own discomfort. Strategic distance flips the power. Your emotional space forces the other person to face what they lost. But for that to actually work, your silence can't be built on hope. It has to be built on real inner strength. That's what keeps you from sliding back into the role that used to define you. When someone comes back out of love, they respect your boundaries. They don't push, don't manipulate, don't play with guilt. They accept that trust isn't demanded. It's rebuilt with patience and consistency. That's real emotional strength. Not chasing, but holding your ground with calm that doesn't crack. Someone coming back out of loneliness wants to rush everything. They say what they think you want to hear. They're chasing the emotional shelter they once found in you. But if nothing inside that person has actually changed, the moment they feel safe again, the old patterns will resurface like they never left. Think of this like a quiet negotiation. Right now you hold the advantage. Their words are just the opening offer. Your emotional intelligence is the filter that separates empty promises from real intentions. You don't react on impulse. You watch, you read, you interpret. The question isn't whether you feel it, it's whether you let it write your next sentence for you. Ask directly, what do you actually want from me? And watch how they answer. Dodging, loaded silences, emotional pleading, these usually give away fear. Clear, humble, accountable answers show real growth. It's not just what they say, it's how they say it. Emotional maturity shows up as patience. Loneliness shows up as urgency. Someone who genuinely values you won't be afraid of your silence. They'll respect it. They'll be willing to rebuild step by step, without forcing anything, without rushing out of anxiety. This moment sets the direction for everything after it. This is where your self-respect either gets stronger or breaks, where your boundaries become solid walls or revolving doors. How you handle this first question decides the pace of what comes next. Whether you lead with discipline or get swept up by emotion all over again. Your silence isn't punishment. It's a way of observing. By staying out of the way, you let their actions speak. And when you're not reacting, you're evaluating. That's where your power lives. Love is aware, patient, accountable. Loneliness is impulsive and evasive. If their return is really just an attempt to escape their own emptiness, no amount of reconciliation is going to hold anything real together. If you get their motives wrong now, you'll pay for it later. Regret hurts worse the second time, because this time you already knew what you chose to ignore before. That's why this first question isn't just an opening move. It's the foundation everything else gets built on, whether from strength or from illusion. You can list all 7 of these questions from memory an hour from now, and still cave the second a message actually shows up on your screen. That gap between the list and the moment is the whole problem. There's a practical digital ebook, The Power of Not Reacting, that lays out exactly how to close that gap. Subscribers get a special offer on it right now for a limited time, and the link is in the first pinned comment. Question 2. How are you going to rebuild the trust you broke? Strategic silence isn't indifference. It's fertile ground for watching without filters. When you're not rushing to fill the gaps with your own wishful thinking, their real intentions show up through actions, not explanations. Emotional discipline is the barrier that keeps hope from disguising itself as proof. And Stoic clarity is the light that lets reality speak for itself. Someone who actually values you understands the weight of broken trust. They don't expect forgiveness to arrive instantly, and they don't try to rush past your doubts. They know trust isn't handed out. It's earned, one brick at a time. They don't push against your boundaries. They don't test your empathy. They accept your walls without getting defensive about them. Someone who hasn't changed gets impatient instead. They ask, why can't you just let it go, or accuse you of overreacting. Under the weight of accountability, their emotional maturity falls apart. They're not trying to repair anything. They're trying to protect themselves from the discomfort they caused in the first place. Rebuilding trust is a slow, almost hand-built process. It takes transparency, saying what you actually feel and think without hiding it. It takes consistency, repeating trustworthy behavior even when nobody's watching. And it takes humility, accepting that getting back what was lost is painful, and that the price is time and effort. So the question is direct. How are you going to rebuild the trust you broke? And while they answer, you're not just listening to words, you're reading their internal architecture. Do they offer vague, emotion-heavy phrases or concrete actions? Are they willing to walk the long road, or are they expecting forgiveness to just drop in their lap? Someone genuinely committed has already thought this through. They talk about boundaries they respect, real changes they've made, behaviors they're committed to keeping up. They don't see your caution as a threat. They see it as a legitimate part of the process, and they prepare to move through that reality with patience. Here the psychological power shifts hands. Before they held the emotional influence, now you hold the key. Your trust is the door, your self-respect is the guard, and your discipline decides who gets in and who stays out. Outside promises mean nothing if the character underneath hasn't actually shifted. Circumstances don't transform people, they reveal them. How someone answers this question shows whether they actually evolved or just dressed their words up nicer. Don't confuse guilt with change. Guilt wants quick relief. Change takes responsibility and holds steady even when it's uncomfortable. Someone acting from guilt wants your forgiveness to calm their own discomfort. Someone acting from real change wants to rebuild to repair what they broke. One runs. The other stands through the test of time without complaining. This question also measures their emotional resilience. If they're genuinely sorry, they'll be able to sit with your coldness without falling apart. They'll see your distance not as an attack, but as a necessary part of the process. That's emotional strength, not weakness. At this stage, strategic silence matters more than ever. It's not a punishment. It's a space where words lose their charm and only actions are left standing. No manipulation survives when the echo stretches long enough. A lot of people trip up here. They hear the right words, feel the old emotions stirring, and let their guard down. They hand out second chances without asking for any kind of rebuilding plan. And when the same patterns come back, the regret hits twice as hard because this time the signs were right in front of them. How they plan to rebuild trust reveals their inner structure. Is it built on discipline and self-awareness, or on nostalgia and fear? Emotional intelligence lets you read that difference without romanticizing it. Inner strength lets you hold steady until the truth surfaces. If they can't answer clearly, if they get defensive or impatient, they're not ready. Trust isn't a favor, it's a structure. And if they want back in, they'll have to lay every brick themselves while you watch without moving. This isn't coldness, it's precision. Psychological power shows up the moment you stop handing over what hasn't been earned. Your self-worth rises the instant you demand proof instead of promises. That's how the entire dynamic gets rewritten permanently. And if they pass this test, another one starts. Because trust alone doesn't guarantee a different future. Something deeper has to have shifted for the story not to repeat itself, which brings up something harder to fake than trust. Question 3. What actually changed? You, me, or just their feelings? Emotions were never proof. They're just signals, and signals can be misread. And when you choose strategic silence, those signals show themselves for what they really are. If their change falls apart the second you stop reacting fast enough, it was never growth. It was panic. That's why this question cuts straight through the emotional fog. What exactly changed? Picture someone who leaves, convinced they'll find something better. Time passes. Loneliness settles in. You keep moving forward, more focused, calmer, more in control of yourself. You're no longer orbiting that story. And then suddenly they rediscover you, not necessarily because they miss who you are, but because they miss the emotional pull you used to have on their life. This happens constantly after a breakup. The moment you stop reacting, the power dynamic flips. Your emotional distance becomes magnetic. Your silence reads as maturity, your strength as pull. But a lot of the time, they're not responding to who you actually are. They're responding to the shift in atmosphere your transformation created. Someone who's actually changed can explain it clearly. They talk about introspection, real inner work, discipline, new mental patterns. Their growth doesn't depend on you, it holds up on its own, even if you're not there. They've built emotional intelligence, not just emotional need. But if their change comes down to vague lines like, "I just know I love you now," that's not transformation, that's impulse, dressed up in romantic language. Maybe they're acting out of jealousy, fear of losing you for good, or dread at the thought of someone else taking the place that used to be theirs. Ask directly, no dancing around it. What actually changed? You, me, or just your feelings? Their reaction tells you everything. Someone who really changed answers calmly and clearly. Someone acting from emotion stumbles through confused lines, gets defensive, or tries to steer you off topic. Emotions on their own are like fireworks, intense for a second, gone just as fast. Real transformation is like a steady flame, quiet, solid, lasting. Chase the emotional fireworks, and you end up in a loop of dizzying highs and painful crashes. Look for the real change instead, and you stay grounded in clarity. Watch their behavior before and after the breakup. Have they built any actual discipline? Do they show more responsibility, more reflection, less reactivity, or are they just craving the emotional safety you used to provide? The gap between growth and nostalgia decides whether getting back together builds something or wrecks it. This is where strategic silence does real work. By not rushing in, you let their emotions either settle or fade on their own. Your detachment gives you perspective. Psychological power gets stronger in that pause. A lot of people mistake the impact of your absence for deep change. It's like touching a hot stove. The pain creates awareness, but not wisdom. Real transformation happens after the burn, in the habits people build when no one's watching. That's where emotional maturity actually lives. You also need to look at yourself. Did you really change, or are you just standing in the same spot colder? If your growth is real, you won't accept dynamics you already outgrew. If theirs isn't, the whole thing collapses the moment the first familiar test shows up again. This question is a mirror. It reflects their evolution, but yours too. Inner strength lets you hold your own gaze in that mirror without looking away. Clarity helps you separate romantic talk from actual transformation. If their feelings only changed because you pulled away, that's reaction, not evolution. If they grew independently of your silence, that's real. One is manipulation wearing the mask of passion. The other is genuine personal growth that can actually hold up real trust. This moment demands discipline. Don't reward vague feelings with instant acceptance. Ask for proof, not words. Consistency held over time. Emotional distance protects you from nostalgia and lets you see what's actually standing in front of you. The Stoic path isn't about judging harshly. It's about seeing clearly. Emotions can lie. Transformation shows up in patterns, in habits, in how someone handles friction. If nothing essential has shifted, the story repeats itself with the same painful precision. How they answer this question sets the stage for what comes next, because even if they claim they've changed, what they actually regret reveals their core, and that leads straight into the next test. Question 4. What exactly do you regret? Ask them directly. What exactly do you regret? Then stay quiet. Here, strategic silence works like a spotlight. There's no hiding from it. It forces the other person to show whether their so-called regret is emotional performance or real self-reflection. Their answer will reveal their emotional intelligence or the lack of it. Someone who genuinely regrets what they did doesn't hide behind vague phrases. They can name the exact moments they failed, the patterns they repeated, the choices that broke trust. They've thought about it deeply. Their voice doesn't carry the urgency of fear. It carries the weight of accountability. Meanwhile, someone who only regrets losing you keeps the focus on themselves. They talk about their pain, their loneliness, their fear. They say, "I can't live without you," not "I understand how much this hurt you." Their words are trying to pull you back emotionally, not build anything solid. Real regret has structure. It includes self-awareness, accountability, and an actual plan for change. It's never just "I miss you." It sounds more like "I know what I did, I understand why I did it, and I've worked to make sure it doesn't happen again." That's emotional maturity in action. A lot of people confuse guilt with regret. Guilt is a feeling. It wants forgiveness to ease its own discomfort. Regret is understanding. It takes responsibility so you can feel safe again. Guilt fades fast. Regret changes behavior. This question is what separates the two. Character only shows itself under pressure. Everything before that is just a guess. Someone who's truly changed doesn't get defensive when faced with this question. They don't minimize, don't shift blame, don't try to run from it. They sit in the uncomfortable fire because they've already faced it alone. Someone who hasn't changed tries to soften the story instead. We both made mistakes. Let's just look forward. I don't want to talk about the past, but the past is exactly where the honesty of someone's regret gets tested. If they can't face it now, they won't face it later either. Watch their language. Are they specific or vague? Are they focused on your pain or their own discomfort? Are they showing understanding or dodging it? Words are clues, but their posture, tone, and patience tell you even more. Your own emotional self-control is the filter that separates a performance from the truth. This moment is a turning point. Regret born from fear leads to manipulation. Regret born from accountability opens the door to real change. If they can't explain what they regret, it's because they haven't actually reflected on it. And if they haven't reflected, they're not ready for a second chance. Your own self-respect sets the standard here too. If you accept vague apologies, you're teaching them that access to you comes from emotion, not growth. If you demand clarity, you're showing that the power has shifted hands. You're no longer waiting, you're evaluating. The strategic silence after this question acts like a mirror. It shows their depth or their emptiness. Someone who genuinely feels regret won't fill that silence with emotional noise. They'll sit in it because they've already sat with it inside themselves. In a lot of breakups, what people actually miss isn't the person, it's the benefits. They miss the attention, the emotional security, the status. They don't regret what they did. They regret the consequences. That distinction changes everything. It decides whether reconciliation rebuilds something or just repeats it. A real apology isn't a performance. It's a confession backed by actual change. It's not "I didn't mean to hurt you." It's "I hurt you. That happened. Here's what I learned. Here's what I changed." That level of honesty can't be faked for very long. If they hesitate, get defensive, or try to blame you for even asking, they haven't done the work. If they answer with honesty, depth, and accountability, you've touched something real. Genuine regret opens the door to transformation. Fake regret is the trap that resets the same cycle. And if their regret passes this test, there's still another step. Because even with honesty and clarity, what really matters is how they handle your boundaries and your doubts. That's where the next question comes in, like a spotlight on their character. Will they respect your pace or crack under the pressure? Here's the part most people skip past. Understanding why you keep reacting the same way isn't the same as actually stopping yourself from doing it in the moment. You can know all of this and still freeze, still send the text you regret, still fall back into the exact loop you swore you were done with. That gap between insight and action is where the power of not reacting comes in. It's not a theory book, it's a practical digital ebook built to close that gap. Right now, there's a 37% discount for subscribers for a limited time, and you'll find the link in the first pinned comment. Question 5. How are you going to handle my caution and my boundaries now? Someone who's genuinely changed isn't afraid of your caution. They welcome it. They'll tell you take whatever time you need and back it up with actions, not pressure. They'll show consistency without expecting an instant reward for it. Their inner strength lets them move through your emotional distance with patience, not demands. That's power too, just on the right side of it. Someone who hasn't changed reads your boundaries as rejection. Their emotional intelligence can't tell the difference between not yet and never. So they start pushing harder, dressing manipulation up as vulnerability. This is where your discipline makes all the difference. Don't reward pressure with access. Resistance is where character actually gets tested, not before. Anyone can play the part of the changed person when everything's going smoothly. But when silence shows up, when replies get delayed, when boundaries hold firm, the truth comes out, steady or fragile, evolved or still reactive. Strategic silence at this stage works like a scalpel. By holding your ground, you let their behavior unfold naturally. If they respect your pace, that shows maturity. If they react with panic, impatience, or guilt trips, their emotional core gets exposed. A lot of people get this wrong because they confuse persistence with passion. They think someone who fights against their boundaries must be doing it out of deep love. But often, it's insecurity wearing a different outfit. Real love doesn't need to tear down your defenses. It works alongside them. Your caution protects your future. It keeps you from repeating cycles driven by impulse. This isn't about punishing them. It's about watching them on ground they can't control. That's where the truth lives, not in their promises, but in their patience. Someone genuinely committed to reconciliation doesn't fear your boundaries. They respect them. They understand that rebuilding trust takes time. They know second chances without structure end exactly like the first one did. At this stage, attempts at manipulation tend to peak. Emotional pleading, waves of nostalgia, guilt trips, or even sudden coldness meant to provoke a reaction out of you. That's why your self-awareness and emotional distance matter so much right now. You need to see the game without becoming a piece in it. If they can't handle your caution now, they won't handle real challenges later either. If they don't respect boundaries at the start, they won't respect them down the line. This question measures their resilience and their emotional discipline. Watch them closely. Do they lean in with patience or pull back with frustration? Do they listen to your pace or try to rewrite it? This isn't just about love. It's about how someone behaves once the power is no longer in their hands. If they pass this test, something even bigger is waiting. Because your boundaries reveal their present maturity, but their vision reveals their real intentions for the future, which is exactly the kind of thing you find out by asking one more question. Where do they actually want this to go? Question 6. How do you picture our future? This question pulls them out of the comfortable territory of emotion and into strategic vision. Can they describe what a healthy dynamic would actually look like? Do they talk about growth, shared goals, mutual respect? Or do they retreat into vague feelings because building something real takes more than just feeling something? This moment also tests their emotional resilience. Talking about the future takes real vulnerability, not a romantic performance. If they genuinely value you, they won't fear this question. They'll meet it with clarity and openness. If they're not ready, they'll dodge it, change the subject, or try to turn it into a joke. Emotional intelligence isn't measured by how easily someone says "I love you." It's measured by their ability to lay out a direction under pressure. A clear, solid answer reveals real inner strength. A vague, confused one exposes emotional immaturity and a lack of discipline. After asking this question, strategic silence matters. Don't fill the space with explanations or reassurance. Let their vision, or the absence of one, sit there and echo. That echo tells you whether you're in front of someone ready to build, or someone still lost in their own emotional fog. If they don't have a concrete vision, their return is being driven by feelings, not strategy. And feelings alone don't sustain trust, self-respect, or lasting change without clarity. Even the strongest attraction eventually collapses back into the same old patterns. With this question, the whole frame shifts. You're no longer reacting to their emotional return, you're evaluating their strategic capacity. Their answer decides whether you're walking toward a future or right back into the past, wearing new packaging. And if their vision is clear, the most decisive moment of all arrives. Because even if they know where they want this to go, they still have to prove they deserve to walk that road with you. One question is left, and it's the one that lands the last word. Question 7. Why do you think you deserve a second chance? This is the last door. It doesn't open with emotion, it opens with evidence. This question forces them to prove their return isn't built on loneliness, regret, or nostalgia, but on real transformation. It demands they measure up to your standards, not just to old memories. If they can't, this ends here. If they can, you're no longer relying on promises, you have real information to decide with clarity, because the question was never whether they want you. It's whether they can actually walk beside you without collapsing back into the version of themselves that destroyed what you had before. This question leaves no room for illusions, only the truth remains. Only the truth remains. This is where you stop needing them to answer honestly, because their actions have already told you everything the words were dancing around. What started as an unexpected emotional return becomes a strategic moment of clarity. You learn that wanting isn't the same as growing, that words without structure fall apart under pressure. That disciplined silence reveals more than any emotional speech ever could. These 7 questions aren't random. Each one acts like a spotlight, lighting up a different corner of their intentions. One reveals their real motives, another tests their accountability. Others show whether the change actually took root, or whether you're looking at the same script with different wrapping. By the time you reach the last one, illusions don't survive. Only reality is left standing. But the real transformation here isn't theirs, it's yours. You went from waiting to evaluating, from emotional vulnerability to psychological strength, from blind hope to calm verification. This is the point where Stoic wisdom stops being theory and becomes something you can actually use. Strategic silence isn't passivity. Emotional control isn't coldness. Together they build an environment where the truth has nowhere left to hide. And once you master this, any reconciliation that follows is built on respect, not desperation. And if there's no reconciliation, you walk away with clarity, dignity, and inner strength that doesn't break. Most people never get here. They get swept up by the first emotional wave, mistake intensity for depth, and open the door without asking for any real structure. But not you. You paused, you asked, you watched. And in doing that, you stepped into a place very few people ever experience, that quiet, steady place where real power actually lives. Real change doesn't come from hope. It comes from structure, discipline, and mastering yourself from the inside. These 7 questions dismantle manipulation, expose immaturity, and reward genuine change. Whether they stay or go is secondary. What matters is that you're now moving from strength, not from lack. You already understand your own patterns better than anyone else who's tried to explain them to you. If this gave you a new way of seeing things, don't stop here. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you keep getting tools that sharpen your mind, protect your heart, and build your psychological strength. Every video builds on the last, so the strategy becomes a habit, not an exception. Here's the honest ending to all of this. You can watch 100 videos like this one and still cave the next time your phone lights up at midnight, because a video gives you the questions, not the discipline to actually ask them in the moment. That's the entire difference between understanding your patterns and breaking them. The practical digital ebook, The Power of Not Reacting, was built to carry you past that exact point, with the same structure you just walked through here, laid out step by step for when you're not thinking clearly. Subscribers get a special discount on it right now for a limited time, and you'll find the link in the first pinned comment, because in the end, this was never about getting someone back, it's about never losing yourself again.